Hey, everybody. Good to see friendly faces. Good to see you, buddy Elazar. Good to see you always. Coolest office, I think, in the Valley, for sure.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. It's good to see you as well and everybody here. So,
Yeah, and you know what? You helped me out, brother, because I was able to gift the heart ceramic piece that I bought to my husband yesterday for Valentine's, and it was just like, of course I thought of that, you know?
oh, perfect. I'm glad it worked out. Jackie puts a lot of love into those pieces as well, so it's very real.
There, see, I'm telling you, man, it was good. You totally saved me. Totally saved me. Good to see everybody. All right, let's give people just another minute or so. By the way, weather forecast, since we are talking about climate here, it's supposed to be wet this weekend. So be very, very careful on the roads. It's be very wet in Merced. Okay, let me just go ahead and get us started. Again, my name is Eric Serrato. I am the project director, the convener here for North Valley Thrive. This is our third and our last 1 hour lunchtime session, looking at a third area of our region focused on climate and the environment. As always, if you're listening in Spanish, this is for you. Si requiere traducción, Yolanda, ¿nos puede decir un poco cómo se pueden conectar con la traducción?
Buenas tardes. En el menú bajo de su pantalla hay un icono en forma de mundo que dice interpretación. Si lo presiona va a poder escuchar la presentación en español y tenemos las diapositivas en español también. Se van a poner en el área de los mensajes.
Gracias. Siempre se me va de mente. So thank you for reminding me on that. And as always, the slide deck from today is going to be posted on our website. And it's actually in English and in Spanish. So if you want to access it in Spanish or share it with a Spanish-speaking reader, please make sure that you download that off our website. We're also going to make sure by the end of the week that all of the videos that we've recorded of these sessions are up there. So you'll be able to access those and send those to folks in our community that weren't able to participate. Before I hand it over to Dr. Pogue and his team, did want to give you a little bit of an update in terms of our kind of rolling out of this data. As you probably know by now, the end of 2023, on New Year's Eve, actually, Dr. Pogue submitted this mammoth report, 500 pages, about all areas of our region, looking at, again, the economy, looking at the environment, looking at job quality, and looking at demographics. We've then had these 3 sessions, today being our last, that really walks into 3 key themes of that information and gives us an opportunity to discuss it a little bit. In addition to these 3 webinars, we're going to be rolling out a series of paper updates. The first will be happening sometime this month, and it'll be a summary of just the data that we've been talking about, sort of looking at socioeconomic data for our 3 counties. Then a couple months later, in around April, we're actually going to release an analysis document, which will be sort of a SWOT document and looking at an analysis of our stakeholders, sort of taking the information and then giving a little more context to that information and talking about sort of our strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. That'll be happening at around April. Then a couple months from that, we're going to release kind of an output of what we will have done by that point with a series of working groups. We're thinking about exactly what shape those will take. But by June, we'll have had lots of conversations with you as community partners and industry and members of government, traditional economic development folks about these areas of the economy and what it might take to transform our economy and point us in the direction of just emergent opportunities. So we'll have some early insights for that around the June timeframe, and we'll be presenting that to all of you. And then finally, in August, a couple months from that, we'll have a document that really focuses on our future-looking, our forward-looking strategies in terms of what our priority sectors and investments might look like to really move us forward as an economy and as a community as a whole. So again, February is going to be a distilled version of like just the numbers. Then in April, we'll give you some more analysis and a mapping of some stakeholders and some opportunity mapping. And then in June, after having had lots of conversations with all these different partners, we'll talk about some early insights about ways to transform parts of our economy. And then that all rolls up into a final deliverable that we have for the state in August, which is our strategic priorities. Again, all that's going to be on the website. No need to take any notes on this, but just wanted to let you know that we really are kicking off several months of sharing information and creating space for us to examine it. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Pogue.
Thanks very much, Eric. Pull up the slides here. Hopefully everybody can see them. Today, as Eric said, we are talking about the last two sections of the socioeconomic assessment that are really fundamental. And excuse me, I didn't pull this up while Eric was talking. I wanted you to see him when he spoke. But if you do need interpretation, here is the directions briefly. Hopefully you are already there, thanks to the guidance that Eric and Yoli gave you earlier. Again, we're going to run through, I'm going to discuss the section on public health, which was led by a colleague, Stephen McCarty. So I will try to do justice to his great work, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mel Amoroso-Pohl, to walk you through the work that she did in the climate and environment section. And as Eric said, this is the last of our reports. And as I've said every time, we're trying to give you an overview through these webinars. And today with the public health section, my colleague Stephen has really tried to illustrate how these issues impact the community and what do they mean in terms of the inequities that are apparent from the data, really taking it to analyze the issues that are associated with the data and what do they mean. And both of these sections on public health and climate and the environment are issues whose characteristics and conditions are fundamental enablers and impediments to our region's socioeconomic development. So they've been kept as separate themes, but they really are critical to whatever we do, and thinking about some of those needs and opportunities that are present through these subjects hopefully will be clear by the end of today. And as we think about our industry plays, our other areas, I think that this material really sets up the importance of these considerations. Before walking you through the details of what my colleague did, and it's going to be very brief because I want to give as much time as possible to Mel, I wanted just to orient you again to what's in the assessment. And the 6 sections of the assessment, I'll walk through briefly. The first section, section 3.1, is an overview of the community health needs assessments and community health improvement plans that are currently available across the North San Joaquin Valley region. And this section of the report really gives an overview of the structure of public health governance in the NSJV region, with the details that are in these important documents from each of our 3 counties. That's followed by section 3.2, which looks at the intersection of the economy and climate on public health, and looking at the Cal EnviroScreen indicators. Those are detailed in Appendix 3B, but this also overlaps a lot with what Mel's going to be talking about. But there's important issues directly focused on public health in section 3.2 of the assessment that I'll be that are in the report that I would recommend you take a look at. In section 3.3, focuses on the social conditions driving health in the region, and using the Healthy Places Index, the NSJV is compared to the other counties in the state to give us a context for where our region sits in terms of its public health dimensions of its public health. And in section 3B, those details are presented in detail. Section 3.3, 3.4 shifts to an intra-regional focus, where we look at some of the details. We know our counties are similar and united, but there are some important differences across the 3 counties. And 3.4 delves into some of the county-specific indicators of health, and using the county indicators, and the details of that are immense, as you can imagine, and they're in actually 3 appendices, appendices 3C, 3D, and 3E, with details down to census tracts level in 3E, with some of the maps that are reported in the report there. And section 3.5 looks at the social determinants of health, and builds on an analysis that the San Joaquin Valley Public Health Consortium did back in 2022, and looks at it for what does the North San Joaquin Valley region look like compared to the other 13 California Jobs First regions. Where do we rank? And so you'll hear me as I'm walking through some of these issues briefly today, refer to some of our rankings compared to the other California Jobs First regions. This was original research done, led by Stephen and our research interns here at the center, to give us a context of what's done, and looking at the 98 indicators that the San Joaquin Valley Public Health Consortium identified as important context for the social determinants of health. And finally, section 3.6 gives an overview of the overall context with which these public health issues can be found in terms of statewide and local policies, very briefly summarizing that. As you can imagine, with all that information, there's an awful lot to get your head wrapped around, and that has been synthesized in the introduction, in the beginning overview, in terms of what emerged as really 5 key thematic areas that were common to all of our areas, and really seemed to be priority themes of need across our area. And those are listed up there in the overview, those 5 areas being the behavioral health, mental health theme, climate change and environmental health theme, the health and safety theme, the healthcare access and transportation theme, and then the income, education, and employment theme. And Stephen's identified 4 inequities that relate to those themes, and that's what I'm going to spend the next few minutes just walking you through. What does that look like in terms of some of these important inequities that are related to the conditions that are described in the report. hopefully I'm going to change my slide. There we go. So the first inequity is drinking water quality, and the challenges associated and our location in terms of what does it matter. And some of these potential disparities have been listed over here on the left. Two of the five themes are really central to this inequity. That's climate change and health and safety. Identifying issues like life expectancy impacts, chronic kidney disease, and other diseases linked to water quality, such as cardiovascular disease. Additions to that are groundwater threats, extreme heat. All of these Mel's going to talk about in some more detail. But importantly, as we look at where our community is vulnerable, we see that most all of the communities across the North San Joaquin Valley are ranked in some of the lowest percentiles in terms of most worst conditions in the state, according to their rankings. And this series of graphs here gives a few of those. The groundwater threats percentiles, where the highest percentile is the greatest threat. You see that we have a lot of the darker colors indicating the greater threatened communities, the impaired water body percentiles. And related to those direct waters are some of the potential contributors, including like the pesticide percentiles in terms of exposures to pesticides, and the frequency of cardiovascular disease, which is shown up in there. In the report, there's details that talk about that inter-regional comparison across the California Jobs First. A couple of indicators in that regard are drinking water quality, impaired drinking water quality, where the North San Joaquin Valley is 13th out of the 13 regions in terms of its drinking water quality. Years lost in terms of life expectancy, the NSJV is 10th. Chronic kidney disease we're 11th out of the 13 regions, and cardiovascular disease we're also 11th. So again, a huge potential impacts and challenges associated with water quality, and Mel is going to talk some more about those shortly in her presentation. Another key inequity that has emerged from this is air quality, and some of these air quality health disparities that are discussed in the report are listed here on this slide. This inequity covers two themes: the climate change and health and safety inequity. There's too much to go into in terms of details, but there are a lot of these critical indicators suggesting the air quality is one of our fundamental regional inequities in terms of challenges that we face. As we look at a few indicators of this, these are the PM 2.5. These are the small particle prevalence, and when we look in terms of where our regional ranking is, we see that we're 10th out of the 13 regions in terms of diesel particulate matter exposures, and when we look at the prevalence of asthma, the North San Joaquin Valley region ranks 13th of the 13 California Jobs First regions in terms of asthma ER visits. We're 12th in the state in terms of stroke deaths. We're 10th in the state in terms of lung cancer deaths, and we're 9th in the state in terms of chronic COPD, pulmonary disease. The third inequity that's been identified as a result of these indicators is the social determinants of health. And this touches on another two themes of the five, health, safety, and income, education, and employment. Some of these indicators in terms of the public health assessment that are related to this are listed here on the slide. The frequency and our relatively poor performance is very apparent in this regard. As we look at some of the rankings in terms of where we come out, this real cost measure was done by the United Way of California, and it shows that in terms of where we rank, they were able to rank 41 counties and county combinations in the state. Merced was ranked lowest in terms of its ability of households to meet its real costs, which is related to our self-sustainability measure, which we spoke about a couple weeks back now. And both of our other counties are in the bottom half in terms of this real cost measure. Again, related to the challenge that we faced in general in terms of inequities in social determinants of health. Where we look at the community level in terms of where some of these figures are prevalent, we see the challenges in terms of population exposures, education, logistics, isolation. We have a lot of challenges, which I know we've spoken about previously, but these all are important in terms of as we look at our region's challenges in terms of these social determinants of health. The fourth key inequity that is apparent from the public health assessment is this lack of access. And this really touches on a variety of the themes that are clear from the analysis: behavioral health, health and safety, healthcare access, and income, educational, and employment are all obvious challenges. The range of these indicators are again listed here. As we look at them, they're a variety that are just very clear in terms of these challenges that our communities are facing in terms of accessing adequate health. And this table I like because it gives a couple of data points, although they're very small, and I apologize for that. But it really shows where we are compared to the rest of California and the United States. In terms of the ratio of dentists per capita, for every dentist in Merced County, there's 2,200 residents. And in San Joaquin County, it's 1,700 residents per dentist. That's compared to a ratio of 1,100 to 1 in California as a whole. When we look at mental health providers, Merced County's 430 to 1 compared to a statewide rate of 240 to 1. Again, these are just some of these key dimensions of this lack of access that our communities are faced with that are really important. As well as primary care physicians, we see, again, these ratios are disproportionately high compared to the state as a whole and the country as a whole. There is a wealth of information. There is so much great detail in the appendices. I really encourage you all to explore them and to please reach out with us with more specific questions. We'll obviously talk about them at the end of our conversation today. But my colleague Stephen is really excited about this and would love to delve into some of these issues in greater detail with you all. And hopefully we can do that at some point in the future. Where we are rated as we look at our region as a whole overall, we're in the lowest quartile, is what this is saying in terms of the Healthy Places Index. If we look at ourselves compared to the other parts of California as counties, our region ranks in the lowest quartile in terms of its overall health conditions. And an important aspect of many of these health challenges we face are environmentally related. And in that context, I think it's appropriate that the other subject, which is going to be spoken about today, is the climate and environment. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mel, to talk through some of the key issues and dimensions of the baseline assessments, climate and environment report.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Pogue. So I won't spend as much time on this slide as Dr. Pogue did with the public health section, but I did want to provide a general overview of the topics and issues that are covered in the climate and environmental section. So we started out by examining environmental exposure and social vulnerability in the NSJV. And these are components that we kind of consider for each of these different environmental hazards and climate exposures that are in section 3.23. Which I will go over most of those with you today, so I won't run through them right now too much, but this is here if you need a guide. And then the final section, 3.24, examines the regional pollution burden and significant sources of toxic and hazardous waste in the NSJV. And I'll touch on a few of them today, but otherwise we do cover sources for underground storage tanks and Superfund sites in the NSJV, as well as wastewater treatment sites. And then I'll spend some time today talking about industry and the environment as well. The appendixes that are listed are primarily additional data and information that wasn't able to fit in the body of the report. But the one thing I did want to draw your attention to here is Appendix 3.2F, where we listed additional analyses and research items that we realize are necessary for future development of our understanding of the region and the impact of climate and the environment. But for capacity reasons or just data availability reasons, we weren't able to touch on them. But they're outlined there just so that you can see that we have considered these issues and they're flagged for future research priorities. Okay, next slide. So the first thing that I wanted to do was give you an overview of the 4 main themes that we've seen come out of this research in terms of the greatest threats the NSJV is facing. So primarily this is extreme heat and rising temperatures, drought and changing precipitation cycles. This includes groundwater overdraft and drinking water access for unincorporated communities, and then flooding due to more severe storms, snowmelt runoff, and proximity to vulnerable rivers and levees. And then the fourth is pollution burden, which includes PM 2.5 and ozone exposure, as well as proximity to pesticides, hazardous waste, and Superfund sites. Excellent. And then so this next slide here, we're looking at environmental exposure and social vulnerability. So the first thing that we wanted to touch on here is this concept of compound vulnerability, which we really see increasing vulnerability to all of these environmental threats throughout the NSJV. So compound vulnerability is essentially when there are 2 or more climate risks or hazards, not all of which need to be extreme, but that affect each other and increase the severity of risk. So here, for example, 54% of the total population in the NSJV makes less than 80% of the statewide annual median income, which means a high poverty level and greater overall vulnerability in context. So essentially you have communities with fewer resources that face both environmental hazards and have fewer resources with which to adapt and respond. This graph here on the right highlights one of these examples. So this is access to green spaces and recreation in the NSJV. And so here you can see in Stockton, invests about $28 per person on parks, which actually ranks in last place among about 100 other cities that were looked at through the Trust for Public Lands Park Score investment ratings. And you see in San Francisco, this is much higher, $480 per person. So while the national median for land dedicated to park and recreational spaces, about 15%, Stockton dedicates about 3% of land for these purposes. And ultimately what this means is less recreation access, fewer places for people to go outside and engage in physical activity, social associations, and these can contribute to poor health outcomes. So this is just an example of how disinvestment and lack of investment in the region can contribute to negative health for residents. Here, I'll just flag that of the 13 California Jobs First regions in California, the NSJV actually ranks between 11th and 13th on a list of 17 issues and indicators. And this concludes drinking water contaminants, groundwater threats, lead exposure, and pesticide exposure. And I have this outlined on the next slide as well. That kind of overviews our ranking in terms of pollution burden and population characteristics, which includes things like education, income, language accessibility throughout all of the different surf regions. And then CalEnviroScreen actually ranks 50 NSJV census tracts, so nearly 18% of the 282 census tracts within the top 10% of census tracts in California in terms of greatest environmental risk. So we do often see ourselves with some of the greatest threats here. Next slide. So this is a map that you actually won't see in the report itself because it's a new vulnerability indicator from the EPA that just came out this year. We're always looking for better ways to visualize and understand our region and its indicators, and so we just wanted to share this. So this is the US Climate Vulnerability Index, which visualizes how drivers of cumulative vulnerability can disadvantage communities across the United States. So it actually looks at over 184 different indicators to examine and see how cumulative impacts can shape community, both from quality of housing and access to supermarkets to proximity to toxic waste sites. So it's taking a lot of these things into account. And so here you can see that San Joaquin County is actually in the 54th national percentile. Stanislaus is in the 52nd, and Merced is quite high in the 73rd vulnerability percentile. So you can see that like in the NSJV, a lot of these regions are highly vulnerable to these compact and compounded impacts of climate and other vulnerabilities. Next slide. Awesome. So this next indicator looks at rising temperatures and heat stress in the NSJV. So overall, annual extreme heat days are predicted to increase from about 4 days on average historically to at least 18 under medium emissions modeling and as many as 52 days annually under high emissions modeling. This is really significant for a lot of like residents throughout the valley. There's a really interesting study from the Washington Center for Equitable Growth that found that any day over 100 degrees can actually lead to a 10 to 15% increase in same-day injuries on the job. Lower income workers tend to experience these vulnerabilities and threats in the worst ways. The study also found that heat-related illnesses can end up costing average workers up to $35,000, both in terms of healthcare and long-term wage impact. So this can have some really serious implications for workers throughout the NSJV. I will call your attention to this graph here on the left. This is a projection of future high heat-related health event durations. So looking at a high emission scenario through end of century. And it looks at future vulnerability rather than current context, but it's showing this duration and severity of health effects related to high heat under a high emission scenario. And you can see that this is significantly more and higher in the NSJV than many southern parts of the valley. Beyond public health, we know that increasing annual temperatures and extreme heat days also pose threats to things like transportation. So we know that extreme heat can damage roads, cause asphalt and concrete cracking, and damage to rail systems by causing tracks to buckle. Increasing temperatures can also pose a threat to agriculture. So both through drought and lack of water resources, both surface and groundwater, but also through things like evapotranspiration of plants and crops. And so this is the process where effectively as the atmosphere becomes warmer, it becomes thirstier, sucking water out of vegetation and requiring more water to keep plants growing and stay healthy, which is obviously a problem when we're facing high heat and drought scenarios. Next slide. Awesome. So as I think everyone knows, due to the region's topography and surroundings, NSJV is frequently impacted by high pressure, strong inversion, and high heat conditions. So even external from the impacts of climate change, the NSJV experiences some of the most polluted air in California. And a lot of this is due to topography. So pollutants that are trapped in the inversion layer between the mountains in the east and the coastal range on the west. So often this pollution originates not just in the valley itself, but is actually coming from sources outside the valley and just gets trapped here. Nevertheless, internal sources for this kind of pollution include vehicle traffic, agricultural production year-round, as well as wildfires and agricultural burning. And these range of pollutants from these sources contain both PM 2.5 as well as ground ozone, which can be both toxic for human health and can irritate the lungs, cause inflammation, and make existing chronic illnesses worse. When looking at Merced, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties, CalEnviroscreen indicates that ozone percentages in the NSJV are about 60%, which means that these counties present better conditions than just 39% of other California counties. This map here on the left shows the PM 2.5 concentrations and indicates that even though air pollution in the southern parts of the valley are often worse, overall, and including other vulnerabilities, the southern regions of the valley are actually, the northern regions of the valley experience worse air pollution often. And next slide. So this is an overview of the local sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the valley. Broadly, we'll talk about this briefly here and then circle back to this a bit for one of the final slides where we talk about the intersections between industry and the environment. But this is data from InPlan, which suggests that several industries are often responsible for more of the climate and environmental impacts. The greatest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the NSJV tend to be transportation and warehousing, utilities, government enterprises, manufacturing, agriculture, and construction. It's really important to note here, and we acknowledge this, that these sectors are also often some of the NSJV's primary sources of both industry and employment. And early conversations that we've had with community has indicated that this dichotomy is something that many localities in the NSJV are struggling to grapple with and to balance. Next slide, thank you. So the northern San Joaquin Valley also faces extreme and severe flood vulnerability due to proximity to floodplains, rivers, older dam infrastructure, especially on the Stanislaus River, and vulnerable levees. We also know that disadvantaged communities in the NSJV are less likely to have resources to respond to or recover from extreme or severe flooding events, which further increases their vulnerability. Many of these communities have roads in low-lying areas, which in times of severe weather, storms, or flooding, are highly vulnerable to extreme flood events. This map here on the right shows in blue the 100-year floodplains throughout the NSJV, with the 500-year floodplains indicated in red. The graphic here on the left, or the chart, or table, sorry, is from a platform called Risk Factor, which is an online tool created to examine flood property risks at the county level. And so here you can see that there is the highest property flood risk in San Joaquin and Merced counties, about 64 and 56% on average, with Stanislaus having about 30% of total properties vulnerable to high flooding. Community conversations have also identified ongoing barriers in hazard communication as a big barrier for preparation and being able to respond and recover from flooding. So disadvantaged communities are often experiencing both the highest risk in terms of exposure due to location, as well as their capacity to respond as well. And next slide. So this is looking at drinking water pollution in the NSJV, which you can see here on the graph on the right. And we apologize that this version doesn't have the NSJV region specifically highlighted. You can mostly see the county borders, but it was easiest for us to show the disparities when we were looking at this region as a whole. So according to CalEnviroscreen, which is the source of this data, the majority of the 3-county NSJV region is in the 90th to 100th percentile in terms of drinking water contamination, which means they experience some of the highest water pollution in the state of California. According to a report from the California Water Board, actually, of the 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley, 5 of them, including San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced, Fresno, Madera, Kern, Kings, and Tulare have some of the highest rates of water contamination per person in the state. Looking at a 2019 PPIC report, we saw that the San Joaquin Valley more broadly contains more than half of all public water systems that are out of water quality compliance in California, even though this is only about 10% of the state's population. So as Thomas briefly mentioned in the public health section, this can result in some serious health concerns for NSJV residents. In the NSJV, nitrate contamination is one of the most widespread causes of water contamination. So while nitrate often naturally occurs in low levels throughout the region, human activities, especially those related to agriculture operations or wastewater treatment discharge, can increase nitrates in the water system to levels that are actually fairly dangerous to human health. Groundwater basin overdraft can make concentration of these contaminants worse, especially for those who rely on domestic wells for drinking water, because these are often shallower. For the San Joaquin Valley, groundwater is the primary source of drinking water for about 90% of residents. So this is a really serious concern. I would point out too that the replacement cost of accessing drinking water and clean drinking water and safe drinking water can often be substantial. The California Water Commission has actually calculated that many of the residents in the valley spend up to 10% of their income on water, as they're effectively forced to buy safe sources like bottled water or truck it in. And that can add an additional economic burden to already stressed households who are struggling financially. The EPA has actually set a criteria for what is considered an affordable household cost for water, and the agency considers potable water affordable if costs are less than 2.5% of the small community's median household income. So for a lot of communities in the NSJV, this is a highly unaffordable way to access safe drinking water. I don't have time to cover it right now, but in the report itself, we also discuss the impact to specifically disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the NSJV and vulnerability related to water sources. Next slide. Thank you. So we also know that in the NSJV, as in other parts of the San Joaquin Valley, we're expected to experience increasing periods of severe drought through end of century. According to CalAdapt, forms of precipitation in the valley will likely include a shorter wet season, more severe periods of rain, but also longer drought periods. So that's something that NSJV should expect and be aware of. Drought means less surface water available for regional irrigation. And knowing what we do about the transition to water sustainability under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, further water constraints are likely going to be required throughout the NSJV. This will obviously impact agriculture and could increase land fallowing throughout the NSJV region. And without strategic and targeted efforts, this could mean a decrease in available jobs for both field and farm workers, as well as for a decrease in economic output for the agricultural industry as well. This map here on the left looks at projected future dry spell projections, again through end of century, so 2070 to 2099. And it indicates the severity of the number of annual dry spell days by zip code. In context here, the darker colors are worse, so up to 158 annual dry spell days through end of century. We also know that drought is going to continue to impact already critically overdrafted groundwater basins. So in March of 2023, the Department of Water Resources actually announced decisions for groundwater sustainability plans throughout the San Joaquin Valley and Central Valley as a whole. Two NSJV subbasins were actually, their plans were deemed inadequate and actually are transitioning into DWR oversight going forward. And for those curious, that actually includes the Chowchilla subbasin in Madera and Merced counties, and the Delta Mendota subbasin in San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced, Fresno, Madera, and San Bernardino counties. And next slide, thank you. Okay, so then here we're starting to look at regional pollution burden and significant sources of toxic and hazardous waste in the NSJV. So critically, there are 266 census tracts in the San Joaquin Valley that are experiencing the highest 25% pollution burden. And 66% of those tracts are located within the 3-county NSJV region. Again, the NSJV ranks 11th of the 13 California Jobs First regions in terms of pollution burden experienced by residents. So this is very significant. For those interested, the census level risk index within each county is actually a lot starker than what you can see in these broader NSJV level maps. And so we've included those in Appendix 3.2a, just for visualizations if anyone is interested. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I don't have a chance to talk about this right now, but we also cover sources of key pollution burden in the region, including Superfund sites, underground storage tanks, and wastewater treatment sites in the NSJV. And next slide. Excellent. Okay, so this is a slide that we are going to introduce with several caveats. So this data is actually from InPlan, which is an economic impact software incorporating the EPA's model for climate and environmental impacts in 8 categories. So the data makes assumptions based on industry business activity and national models for pollution, emissions, land, and water use. And so this includes data on hazardous air emissions, commercial waste, hazardous waste, greenhouse gases, land use, mineral extraction, nitrogen and phosphorus releases, pesticide releases, and water pollution. However, since these accounts use a national model overlaid on local industry activity, the actual impacts on the NSJV may differ from this data. Essentially, it doesn't take California policies or practices into account. For example, here, it shows that utilities are another key primary source, accounting for nearly 1/5 of criteria pollutants, 63% of greenhouse gas emissions, 3/4 of toxic releases, and nitrogen and phosphorus releases. However, there's nearly no way to determine if this is from sustainable sources, so whether this includes wind or solar. However, it's probably the best approximation that we can get for looking at the impact of some of these industries on the environment. And this is a tricky bit of data to work with. So it suggests that there are several industry sectors that are responsible for most climate and environmental impacts, and that these industry sectors have a much larger share of environmental impacts than other industries combined. So it's hinting at a direct connection, and it's not perfect, but it's the closest we can get to kind of understanding and better analyzing this data and this area of research. At best, it suggests the need for more and in-depth research to show the true impact of these things on the NSJV itself. Go back to the last slide. One of the things we did want to flag here, during the last meeting that we had on the presentation, we got some questions about defining sustainable industry for the region. And it's a tricky question because it involves, there's no one-size-fits-all answer, and kind of gets at this concept of striking a balance between the economy, the society, and environment. So prioritizing industries that are meeting demand without compromising the future generations and their ability to enjoy a clean and safe environment. And we're happy to take questions about that, but I did want to flag that as something we remembered that folks had asked about. And next slide. So with these last 2 slides, kind of what I'm hoping to do is sum up some of these issues and talk about how climate and environment might impact public health, socioeconomic challenges, and the economy. So for example, we know that communities struggling with access to clean water might be forced to purchase expensive alternatives, which can cause economic burdens. We know that extreme weather events can damage homes and businesses, which can lead to both economic hardship and displacement. As Dr. Pogue spoke about, air pollution can exacerbate respiratory illnesses, which can lead to poorer health, increased rates of healthcare cost, and lost productivity, or possibly even healthcare expenses. And then drought and water scarcity can increase contamination levels in regional drinking water as well. Moving into the final slide. These are more economic impacts, but we know that increased temperatures and changes in precipitation patterns can reduce crop yields throughout the region, as well as livestock production. And this can have a significant impact on the region's economy, which is obviously heavily reliant on agriculture. And then in terms of drought and water scarcity, we know that climate change will impact and cause longer drought periods throughout the NSJV. So this can increase water scarcity and contribute to groundwater basin overdraft. This could also lead to higher water prices, competition for water resources, and increased land fallowing throughout the NSJV region. This will also further increase the region's vulnerability to other climate hazards such as wildfires, as well as the amount of dust in the air, which could impact poor air quality. And then obviously, like, there is a component of damage to infrastructure. So we know that extreme weather events, floods, wildfire, as well as extreme heat will become more frequent through end of century and intensify due to climate change. And this can damage and disrupt key infrastructure and factors like bridges, roads, power lines, and disrupt essential services as well. And I know that was a lot of information and we went through it very quickly, so I will turn it back over to Eric, but we are more than happy to take any questions.
That was brilliant and absolutely depressing. So thank you. Thank you for doing that for us. Before we open it up, since this is our last one, I want to make sure that we thank Dr. Pogue and his research collaborative, and really the state. You know, it's through the California Jobs First initiative that we actually got the opportunity to fund this work. I mean, never before has this level of attention been paid on our 3 counties. And I think one thing that sticks with me as we've been looking through, through the data and, listening to each of these 3 webinars is that we could talk about this work for years. I mean, every single slide in its, is its own conversation that we could spend 20, 30 minutes, an hour talking about. And in truth, we really are going to spend, the next several months kind of unpacking and doing all this work. And so I've been able to see it up close, and so the amount of work that, Dr. Pogue and Mel and Goiche and Aaron and the entire team have been doing is just phenomenal. I can just imagine the, number of cups of coffee, and the late nights that you guys spent really kind of aggregating all these sources, because nothing like this really existed before. No one's ever looked at Merced County in this way and uplifted these things. And so I think it's just such a huge gift that all of you have made to the, the future of our region. And I thank you, Dr. Pogue, for that. And yes, Noah, for generations. I mean, this is really going to give us enough to think about for a long time and make some really important decisions about our economy. Dr. Pogue, you've come off mute, so I wanted to.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you and really, again, give kudos to the team. It so wouldn't have been possible without them. And so appreciative of all the great work that everybody did, as well as all the great assistance the community has given us and pointing us in the right direction when perhaps we weren't paying enough attention to certain issues, and really hope that we continue to hear from you all moving forward so that we can help make this analysis and this ongoing work better and inform what we're trying to do here as part of North Valley Thrive.
Cool. And before we, the chat was pretty busy. Actually, interestingly enough, of the 3 webinars, more sort of fire in the chat, which is a really cool indicator of how important this stuff is to you. I also want to recognize those of you that have been on these 3 different webinars. North Valley Thrive, is designed to be this forum where we're just not talking to part of our region, we're talking to all of our region. And so there are, dozens and dozens of you that have been part of our coalition and on these 3 different webinars. On the screen today, we've got about 13 members of our steering committee, which is about half of us on today. So I want to thank you. It really is a steering committee that's going to get an even deeper dive on this work and use this information to make some real informed decisions about investments. So no pressure to the 13 of you, but I hope you took really good notes. Also, a lot of government folks that really care about the future of our region have been on. Even today, we have the CEO of Merced County who's been on and different members of his team. And I know that's been true for the other counties as well. So love that we're all kind of sharing the space together, as well as business owners and chambers of commerce and lots of community groups. So I just thank you for all your attention to this work. Now let's open up for some questions. Rocky, any of those jump out that we might kind of start with?
No real questions, just a lot of affirmation of what's being shared and showing appreciation for the data, but no real questions that are in there.
And if you guys want to populate a question, we can lift it up. I actually have a question for everyone. And that is how else you'd like us to, walk through this work together. We've got an idea of what we want to do, but would love to hear from anyone in the chat, or you can even email me. I'll put my email here. If there are other ways, we're certainly doing 3 webinars. If there's a topic that you think you'd love to hear more about, there's going to be, reports and summaries, but there may be something else that you're thinking about, different ways to kind of experience this data. I would love to hear from you in the chat or by email if there's a thought you've got about that. Here's my email if you want to shoot me an email. There are some of you that are really close to this work, and I'm thinking of Moroka and Matt and SB, chimed in on this work. Matt, I would love to hear kind of like your kind of reflections of this work and how it relates to all the things you've been working on.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I mean, I gotta say, like you said, this is thorough and wholly depressing, and that we have a lot to chew on for a very long time. But I think in the interim, there can always be a phase 1, sort of an urgent, forgive me, oh shit button that we should be hitting. And when we see things like state budgets come out with emergency flood protection dollars that don't target our region, which has the highest flood risk, that there's got to be some way for us to distill, first wave, highest priority, most vulnerable community, really basic advocacy that we can just shoot across the bow of our local electeds and those people who have a chance to inform the state budget. I'm channeling SB here when I think about some of these flood issues and restore the Delta on some of these flood issues. They're not my area of expertise, but it's one of these categorically our problem issues, and the state missed it when it came time to fund it. And as much as we're in a competition and we're working on long-term design solutions, the state budget's a really fickle thing. I've worked on projects in Los Angeles that just came straight out of earmarks from elected officials understanding the issues that their community is impacted by. So I know that I'm not trying to add another community organizing responsibility to you, Eric, and your team, but I think there is a way for us to take this learning and turn it into some sort of a political flag that we raise around our region.
That's great. I want to uplift this highest priority community. Be great to even zero in even more to understand, where that is in that space. That's great.
Eric,
Anybody else?
I just realized that I need to mention some work of our colleagues down at Stan State. Goiche led a initial public health disparities a survey, which dug into some of these specific issues and really gave us an initial picture of what does it mean to our local communities in terms of challenges to access and their priorities. And watch this space. We've got colleagues from UC Merced also doing an upcoming survey that's going to be looking at some disinvested communities as well. But wanted to thank again those colleagues, Goiche in particular, for his leadership on that work, and that will be coming out at some point in the next couple of months as well to be shared with the community.
Cool.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the acknowledgement. It's always.
Yes. And so again, if you've got thoughts about other parts that you'd like to have us explore a little more or do a little more thinking on, that'd be great. We also have on the screen today our county coordinators who are really embedded in each of our 3 counties, and they have been phenomenal at sort of aggregating all of that community feedback up. And you saw it in the slides where Mel kind of reflected on what all of you had said. And so that is another source of direction. And you're going to see your county coordinators active again, sort of bringing that to the center. Espe.
Yeah, just to kind of like dovetail on what Matt was saying, besides like the state level, I think even at our regional level with our folks that are decision makers, that are representative of our region, countywide and our cities, in terms of having this information, maybe we can do like a cliff note version of it, but then, have like the bigger, background, because I have been sharing it with, quite a few folks, but I think that making that digestible, because as you move forward in trying to help to mitigate these different issues at the local level, I think that we really need to involve the local officials, and then at the same time is to see how we can also put out pieces to our community members, in English and Spanish, because it's so much information, but then maybe making like bite-sized versions of it, and then leading them to the resources, and which are great. I think it's absolutely great, this report, how it's put together, and it's very much overall comprehensive, and it brings the attention that's very much needed for our region. Thanks.
Right. Spoken like a true steering committee member. All right. Okay, guys, we are at 1 o'clock, 1:01. Want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch.